I left 3 people sitting at a dinner table on a rooftop in Atlanta, staring at the truth I had just placed between the champagne glasses and the untouched dessert plates. My mother, my husband, my little sister. As I walked toward the elevator, my heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm, and I did not look back. Not once. But I should start at the beginning. My name is Kendra. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia, the city where I was born, where I learned to sketch floor plans on the backs of grocery receipts, and where I built a career as an architect. I design buildings that make people slow down and look up. I don't say that to brag. I say it because you need to understand something about me before I tell you the rest. I build things. That has always been who I am. I build structures. I build routines. I build relationships. I built a life that looked, from the outside, solid and beautiful. Then I found a folded note inside my sister's diary, and everything I thought I had built started to come apart. I grew up in Cascade Heights, on the southwest side of Atlanta, in a red brick house with white shutters and 2 magnolia trees in the front yard. My mother, Yvonne, bought that house with money she saved over almost 20 years working as a hospital administrator. She loved that house with a kind of discipline I didn't fully understand when I was a child. She polished the wood floors herself, repainted the porch railing every spring, and kept the yard so neat that even the neighbors joked about it. My father died when I was 9 and my sister Zoe was barely 1. A heart attack. Sudden. I remember the sound of my mother screaming more clearly than I remember his face, and that truth has stayed with me for years. But my mother didn't collapse. She grieved. Then she stood up and raised 2 daughters alone. She refused to sell the house. She refused to leave the neighborhood. At the time, I thought she was stubborn. Now I think she was trying to protect the life she and my father had started together. Zoe was 8 years younger than me. When you're children, 8 years feels enormous. By the time she was learning to ride a bike, I was already shutting myself in my room with design magazines and drawing impossible homes with glass walls and sharp, clean lines. I loved her, though. I always loved her. I braided her hair before school. I helped with homework that made her cry. I drove her to her first school dance and sat in the parking lot for hours because she didn't want our mother picking her up. Zoe was beautiful in a way that never seemed forced. People noticed her. She had our father's cheekbones and our mother's wide, expressive eyes. She moved through the world lightly. I didn't. I was more deliberate, more planned. Where I was disciplined, Zoe was impulsive. Where I saved, she spent. Where I protected what I had, Zoe always seemed to believe life would somehow open for her. She went to college in Savannah, studied communications, changed majors twice, almost dropped out once, then finally graduated and moved back home. She said she needed a little time to figure out her next step. A few months turned into almost a year. My mother didn't mind. She liked hearing someone upstairs again. Then there was Donovan. I met Donovan Grant at a networking event in Buckhead when I was 25. He was 27, tall, confident, with a smile that always arrived before his words. He worked in accounting at a mid-sized firm downtown. He asked for my number that night, and he called me the next morning. I remember being impressed by that. He felt direct, intentional, like a man who knew what he wanted. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He did it on the rooftop of the building where we had our first date. At the time, I thought it was romantic. Later, that detail felt cruel. We got married in a small ceremony in Piedmont Park. My mother insisted on magnolias in my bouquet. Zoe stood beside me as my maid of honor in a lavender dress that made her look like she belonged on a magazine cover. Then came 5 years of marriage. 5 years of shared breakfasts, Friday night movies, small arguments about bills and thermostats and home repairs. 5 years of ordinary life, which is another way of saying 5 years of trust. I believed what we had was real. What I know now is that collapse rarely starts where people can see it. It starts inside the walls, under the floor, in the hidden places no one thinks to check. And I never checked. Not until a Saturday morning in my mother's attic. That morning looked ordinary. It was mid-March. Atlanta was in that early spring mood where the air smelled like wet earth and new blooms, and the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to stay gray or open up. I had a free weekend for once, and my mother had been asking me for weeks to help her clear out the attic. She wanted to renovate the second floor and turn the attic into a proper guest suite. She had been talking about it for years. At 62, she had finally decided to do it. I pulled into her driveway a little after 9. The porch railing gleamed with fresh white paint. My mother opened the door before I rang the bell. "Zoe isn't here," she said. "She went out early. Said she was meeting a friend." I nodded and thought nothing of it. We spent the morning carrying boxes down the narrow attic stairs. The attic held our family's whole history in pieces. Labeled storage bins, my father's old golf clubs, boxes of my childhood drawings, old school papers, framed photos, things no one could throw away. Every object led to another story. We worked slowly, partly because the attic was crowded, partly because memories take time. Around 11, we reached the far corner, where an enormous old sofa sat against the wall. It was covered in faded olive velvet and looked far too heavy for any staircase. My mother stared at it and shook her head. "We have to move this before the contractors come," she said. "I still don't know how your father got it up here." "I've got it," I told her. She gave me a doubtful look and went downstairs to make lemonade, because in my mother's mind no physical labor should happen without lemonade nearby. I grabbed one end of the sofa and pulled. It scraped across the floor in a long, low groan. I pulled again, harder this time, and it moved just enough to reveal the dusty strip of floor behind it. That was when I saw the journal. I knew it immediately. It was Zoe's. Dark brown leather, scuffed at the corners, with an elastic band that had long ago stopped doing its job. She had kept that journal since high school. I had seen her writing in it at the kitchen table, on the couch, in the passenger seat of my car. I bent down to pick it up, thinking I would set it aside and give it back to her later. As I lifted it, a folded piece of paper slipped out and drifted to the floor. It landed face up. I picked it up. I unfolded it. The handwriting was Donovan's. I knew his handwriting as well as I knew his voice. Slightly slanted, tight, impatient. He wrote the way he spoke when he was in a hurry. The note said, "Your sister is going to find out about everything soon. Just have a little more patience. I am going to file for divorce before our baby is born." I read it once, then again, then a third time, because my mind kept refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Donovan was having an affair with Zoe. Zoe was pregnant, and he was planning to leave me. I stood there in my mother's attic holding that note while sunlight cut through the dust in thin, bright lines. Downstairs, I could hear my mother moving around in the kitchen, ice dropping into glasses, cabinet doors opening and closing. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of a house that had no idea everything inside me had just changed. What still surprises me is this. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't run downstairs and tell my mother. I folded the note back along its original creases, slid it into the journal, placed the journal exactly where I had found it, and pushed the sofa back into place. Then I dusted off my hands, went downstairs, took the lemonade my mother offered me, and spent the next 2 hours carrying boxes and talking about paint colors as if nothing had happened. Because something inside me had already made a decision. I was not going to let shock choose my next move. I was going to choose it. At the end of the day, my mother walked me to my car. The sun was dropping behind the trees, turning the sky soft gold and pale rose. She hugged me the way she always did, tight and a little too long. "Thank you for today, baby," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." I told her it was nothing. I told her I loved her. I smiled, waved, and pulled out of the driveway. Then I drove 2 blocks, parked by the curb, gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, and shook. I still didn't cry, because I was about to drive home to my husband, walk through the front door and ask him how his day had been, and he was going to lie to my face. I needed time to think, time to plan, time to decide what would happen next. So I fixed my expression in the rearview mirror, practiced a smile until it looked believable, and drove home. Donovan was in the kitchen when I got there, chopping onions for a pasta sauce he liked to make on Saturday evenings. He looked up and smiled at me with the same easy warmth he had always used. For 1 sick second, I wondered if I had misunderstood the note. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it meant something else. But I knew his handwriting, and I knew exactly what the word baby meant in that sentence. "Hey, babe," he said. "How was the attic?" "Dusty," I said. "Mom had me working." He laughed. I opened the refrigerator, poured myself water, and drank half the glass before I trusted my voice again. That night, we ate pasta at the dining table we had picked out together. We talked about his week. We talked about a project I was finishing for a client. We talked about replacing the back deck in the summer. Normal conversation. Married conversation. The kind that fills silence because silence is harder. At one point, he reached across the table and touched my hand. I let him. I even turned my palm up and laced my fingers through his, because pulling away would have started a conversation I was not ready to have. But inside my head, another conversation was already happening. How long had this been going on? When did it start? Did Zoe love him? Did he ever love me? That night, after he fell asleep on the couch beside me, I sat in the light of the television and looked at his face. I didn't hate him yet. What I felt was colder than hate. I felt clear. The first week was brutal. I went to work, sat at my desk, opened blueprints, and kept seeing that note. I made mistakes I normally never made. A junior associate had to flag a measurement error for me. I forgot a meeting. I lost my place halfway through a presentation and had to pretend I was checking my notes. I was unraveling, and I knew it. The only thing holding me together was the decision I had made in the attic. Wait, plan, and move, carefully. The following Sunday, Donovan and I went to my mother's house for lunch. My mother had started that tradition years ago, and no one missed it unless they absolutely had to. Donovan drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Atlanta slide by outside the window while he talked about someone at work he didn't like. I made the right sounds at the right moments, but inside I was preparing myself to sit across a table from my husband and my sister and act like I knew nothing. My mother greeted us at the door. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Zoe was in the kitchen. She turned when we walked in and smiled at me. There was something in that smile I would never have noticed before. A strain behind it, a flicker of fear. "Hey, sis," she said. "Hey, Zoe." I hugged her because that's what I always did. Her body stiffened for a second before she hugged me back. That was enough. At lunch, Donovan was almost perfect. Relaxed, helpful, charming. He complimented my mother's cooking, asked Zoe about job applications in a casual, appropriate tone, refilled my water glass. If I hadn't known what I knew, I would have thought nothing of it. But Zoe was different. She laughed a little too late. She kept excusing herself. She barely ate. The second time she came back from the bathroom, her eyes looked red. My mother didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she gave it another explanation. After lunch, Donovan offered to help with the dishes. My mother happily took him up on it. The two of them stayed in the kitchen, and Zoe and I ended up alone in the living room. She sat by the window, scrolling through her phone without really looking at it. I watched her and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. She looked scared, not just guilty. Trapped. She looked up and caught me watching. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just tired." "You look tired." "Thanks," she said with a weak little smile. I wanted to ask her then. I wanted to say, "Tell me the truth. Tell me how this happened. Tell me if he came after you or if you went to him. Tell me if you understand what this will do to our mother." But I said nothing. Because if I confronted her too early, I would lose control of everything. That night, lying beside Donovan in the dark, I made a list in my head. I needed a lawyer. I needed someone who understood divorce, hidden assets, and men who planned ahead. I needed a forensic accountant. And most of all, I needed time before either of them knew that I knew. Monday morning, I sat in my car in the parking garage under my office building and searched for family law attorneys in Atlanta. I read reviews, checked credentials, looked for someone experienced in complex divorces and financial misconduct. One name kept appearing: Diane Stafford, senior partner, 22 years of experience, strategic, composed, ruthless in the right way. I called her office from my car and asked for the earliest consultation they had. When her assistant came back on the line and offered me Wednesday afternoon, I took it. I hung up, sat there for a moment with my phone in my hand, and understood that I had just crossed a line. I was done reacting. Now I was going to plan. I met Diane Stafford 2 days later in her office in Midtown, high above the city in a glass building with a clear view of the skyline. She was in her 50s, lean, precise, with silver hair cut close to her head and the kind of calm that made you sit up straighter without meaning to. She shook my hand, pointed me toward a chair, and said, "Tell me what's happening." So I did. I told her about the attic, the journal, the note, Donovan's handwriting, Zoe's pregnancy, the weeks of lies happening right in front of me. I told it in order, as clearly as I could, because if I let emotion take over, I knew I might not stop. Diane listened without interrupting. She wrote a few notes, then set down her pen. "How long have you been married?" she asked. 5 years. "Any children?" "No." "Joint assets?" "A house in Kirkwood." "Joint checking and savings?" "A joint investment account." "Retirement accounts through our jobs?" She nodded once. "Here's what concerns me. A man who writes a note like that and talks about timing a divorce before a baby is born is probably not just planning emotionally. He's planning financially." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "I thought the same thing," I said. "Good," she replied. "That means your instincts are working. We need to move quickly, but not visibly." "Can you prove anything?" "Not yet, but I know someone who may be able to." She picked up her phone and called a forensic accountant named Lena Okafor. She spoke briefly, got an opening for the following week, then looked back at me. "If your husband has moved money," she said, "Lena will find it." That was the first moment since the attic when I felt even a small piece of solid ground under me. Before I left, Diane gave me my first instructions. Do not confront him. Do not change how I act at home. Do not move money yet. Do not let him suspect anything. I signed the retainer agreement, walked out into the late afternoon light, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing. I wasn't okay. Not even close. But I wasn't helpless anymore. That mattered. The next few days were a strange split-screen version of my life. By day, I worked. I answered emails, reviewed plans, met with clients, and tried not to drift every time someone said the word foundation or structure or risk. By night, I went home to Donovan and acted normal. I asked about his day. I made dinner. I sat beside him on the couch. I let him kiss me on the cheek. Every small interaction felt unreal, like I was playing myself in a version of my life that no longer belonged to me. The next Sunday, we went to my mother's house again. I had hoped that maybe staying away would be possible, but skipping lunch would only have raised questions, and I wasn't ready for questions. So I went. On the drive over, Donovan kept up an easy stream of conversation about work. I answered when I had to. I had gotten better at sounding normal by then. At lunch, Zoe was quieter than the week before. She kept her eyes down, pushed food around on her plate, and spoke mostly when my mother asked her something directly. Halfway through the meal, my mother looked at her and frowned. "Zoe, honey, are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," Zoe said quickly. "Just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." "I've had trouble sleeping." I kept my face neutral and cut a piece of chicken I had no interest in eating. My mother looked at me. "Do you think she's coming down with something?" I swallowed before answering. "Maybe she just needs rest." Zoe glanced up at me then, fast and sharp, as if trying to read whether there was meaning hidden inside my voice. If there was, I didn't let her find it. After lunch, Donovan and my mother went into the kitchen with the dishes. Zoe and I ended up alone again for a few minutes. This time, she didn't even pretend to scroll through her phone. She just sat there with both hands wrapped around a glass of water. "You've seemed distant lately?" she said, without looking at me. I kept my voice light. "Busy." She nodded. Then she said, very quietly, "I miss you." For a second, the room seemed to tilt, because I missed her too. Or at least I missed the version of her I thought I knew. I could have asked then. I could have forced everything into the open in my mother's living room. But again, I stayed still. "I've been busy too," I said. That was all. On the drive home, Donovan reached over and took my hand. I let him. A few minutes later, he said, "Zoe seems off lately. You notice that?" I turned my head slowly and looked at him. His eyes stayed on the road. His tone was casual. Too casual. He was testing me. That was the moment I understood something important. He wasn't just lying. He was monitoring the damage, checking for leaks. "She's probably stressed," I said. "She's trying to figure out her life." "Yeah," he said. "Probably." He squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. I needed to know how far this betrayal went. If he had been stealing from me too, then this wasn't just an affair. It was an exit plan. I met Lena Okafor the following Tuesday in a smaller office Diane used for private meetings. Lena was in her 40s, compact, focused, with a soft voice that made her seem gentle until you watched how closely she studied everything put in front of her. I brought everything I could access without raising suspicion. Tax returns, bank statements, mortgage records, screenshots of our investment account, credit card summaries. Lena spread the papers across the table and went through them line by line. For almost an hour, she said very little. Then she looked up. "There are gaps," she said. My whole body tightened. "What kind of gaps?" "Your joint savings account shows a pattern of withdrawals over the last 8 months. Not huge amounts, small enough to avoid attention, irregular enough not to stand out at first glance, but they add up. And I don't see matching household expenses." I looked at the statements again, even though I already knew I wouldn't spot what she could. "How much?" "Enough to matter," she said, "and enough to suggest intention." My jaw tightened. "Can you trace where it went?" "Yes," she said. "But I need a little time and a few more records." "How much time?" "About 2 weeks." Diane leaned forward. "Until then, you change nothing. Don't close accounts. Don't ask questions. Don't do anything unusual with money. Let him keep believing you have no idea." I nodded. It was getting easier to understand what my job was. Wait. Watch. collect. I went home that night and made dinner with Donovan. We opened a bottle of wine. He told me about a client. I asked follow-up questions. I listened at the right moments. Meanwhile, in the back of my mind, I kept seeing Lena's finger resting on those bank statements. 8 months. That meant while I had been sharing meals with him, making plans with him, sleeping beside him, he had already been slowly pulling money out of the life we had built together. 2 weeks later, Lena called. I went straight to Diane's office after work. They were both waiting for me in the conference room, and the minute I saw the stack of paper on the table, I knew it was bad. Lena turned the first page toward me. "Your husband opened 2 accounts at another bank," she said. "Both in his name only." I stared at the page. Over the last 8 months, he transferred just over $47,000 from your joint accounts into those 2 accounts. He also took a cash advance on a joint credit card and deposited that money into one of them. I looked up. So he created debt in both our names and moved the cash to himself. Yes. I sat very still. I had expected betrayal. I had expected selfishness. But seeing it in neat lines and dates and totals did something different. It stripped away any room for confusion. Numbers have a brutal honesty when people don't. Then Lena slid another page toward me. "This," she said, "may be the most important part." There were recurring payments tied to an apartment in Decatur, 2 bedrooms, monthly rent, utilities. I understood before she even said it. "He rented a place," I said. Lena gave a small nod. "For Zoe," I added. Neither of them answered, and they didn't need to. For a few seconds I couldn't speak. There it was. Proof that this wasn't reckless or accidental or temporary. He had been building another life while still living inside mine. Diane broke the silence. "This helps you," she said. "In legal terms, this shows planning, concealment, and misuse of joint money. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was using marital assets to prepare for divorce." I looked down at the papers again. Dates, transfers, rent payments. His name. It was all there. "What do I do now?" I asked. Diane answered immediately. "Now we protect you." Over the next hour, we mapped everything out. I would open new accounts in my name only for my salary and personal savings. We would gather every piece of evidence quietly. Diane would prepare the divorce filing before Donovan knew anything. If necessary, she would move to freeze the joint accounts. And when the time came, Donovan would be served with documentation detailed enough to leave him very little room to lie. I listened, asked questions, took notes, and felt something surprising rise inside me. Not comfort. Control. For the first time since the attic, I was no longer just surviving each day. I was building a response. That night, I went back to my mother's house alone. I told her I had left a bracelet in the attic the last time I was there. She believed me and let me in without a second thought. I went upstairs, moved the sofa again, found the journal, and took out the note. This time, I didn't stand there reading it. I slid it into a folder, drove to a copy shop a few miles away, made clean copies, and returned the original to the exact same place inside the journal before I left. If I was going to confront them, I wanted proof in my hand. No one was going to tell me I misunderstood. From that point on, the shape of my plan started to sharpen. I still hadn't decided exactly how I would tell them, but I knew one thing for certain. I did not want Donovan controlling the moment. I did not want a private conversation in our kitchen where he could apologize, deny, twist facts, or act wounded. I did not want a late-night argument in our living room. I did not want text messages. I wanted clarity. I wanted witnesses. And, if I was honest, I wanted him to feel what I had felt in that attic, the sudden collapse of certainty. A few days later, I was driving through Midtown after work, stuck in traffic, watching brake lights glow red in front of me, when the idea came. A dinner, a beautiful place, a controlled setting. Just the 4 of us. My mother, Zoe, Donovan, me. Somewhere public enough to keep everyone contained, but private enough for the words to land. By the time traffic finally moved again, I had already made up my mind. That night, over breakfast, I said to Donovan, I want to take the family out to dinner. Somewhere nice. Just the four of us. He looked up from his phone. What for? I let myself hesitate before answering. Just enough. I have some news, I said. Something important. I want to tell everyone at once. He lowered the phone slowly. What kind of news? I smiled. You'll see. He tried to smile back, but I saw the tension in it. Good. Later that day, I called my mother. I want to take everyone to dinner, I told her. Friday night. Somewhere special. That sounds expensive, she said immediately. I'm inviting you, not asking permission. She laughed. All right, what's the occasion? I'll tell you there. She went quiet for a moment. Should I be worried? No, I said. Just come and bring Zoe. My mother agreed. I didn't call Zoe myself. That was deliberate. It was easier to let the invitation come through my mother. It made the evening feel ordinary, even warm. Then all I had to do was wait. And waiting turned out to be its own kind of punishment. I lived two lives at once for the next couple of weeks. In one life, I met with Diane and Lena, signed documents, moved my salary to a new account, and quietly protected everything I could. In the other, I went home to my husband, sat across from him at dinner, and let him believe he was still ahead of me. Some nights, that performance almost broke me. One evening, Donovan came home late, saying he had been tied up in a meeting. When he hung his jacket in the closet, I caught a faint trace of perfume on it. Not mine. I stood alone in the bathroom a few minutes later, holding that jacket in both hands, and for one wild, ugly moment, I wanted to walk into the bedroom and throw it in his face. Instead, I put it back. I washed my face. I went to bed. Every decision became that simple. Not now. Not yet. At Sunday lunch the week before the dinner, Zoe looked even more strained than before. My mother kept watching her, worried while pretending not to be. At one point, my mother said, "You really should see a doctor if you keep looking this tired." Zoe froze for half a second, then forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom." I kept my eyes on my plate. Across the table, I could feel Donovan avoiding looking at her too directly. That was when I knew they were both living in fear now. They didn't know what I knew, but they knew something was wrong. 2 days before the dinner, Zoe called me. Not a text. A call. I was at my desk when her name came up on my phone. I stared at it until the last second, then answered. "Hey, Zoe." "Hey." Her voice sounded small. "Are you busy?" "A little. What's up?" There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "I wanted to talk to you," she said. "Really talk. Just us." My grip tightened around the phone. "About what?" Another pause. Then she said, "There's something I need to tell you." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. This was it. She was going to confess. She was going to do it over the phone, 2 days before the dinner. After all the planning, after all the waiting, after I had spent weeks building the one moment I wanted to control. I closed my eyes. If I let the truth spill out then, everything would scatter. It would become calls, tears, denials, chaos. Donovan would have time to shape the story before I ever got the chance to finish telling it. So I said, as calmly as I could, "Whatever it is, let's talk on Friday. In person. I want to give you my full attention." She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she exhaled. "Okay," she said. "Friday. I'll see you then." When the call ended, I sat with the phone still in my hand and waited for my pulse to slow down. Friday was coming, and when it came, I was going to be ready. The morning of the dinner, I woke before dawn. Donovan was still asleep beside me, one arm thrown over his pillow, his face relaxed in that way sleeping people look innocent even when they are not. I lay there for a minute and looked at him, trying one last time to connect the man in that bed with the man from the note, the hidden bank accounts, the apartment in Decatur. I couldn't. So I got up. I showered, made coffee, and sat alone at the kitchen table while the apartment was still quiet. My handbag sat on the chair beside me. Inside, it was the manila envelope from Diane, copies of the note in the side pocket, and everything I needed to end my marriage before dessert. I had rehearsed the evening so many times that it no longer felt like a plan. It felt like choreography. What I could not rehearse was the emotion. That was the one thing I didn't trust. Not because I thought I would change my mind, but because grief is unpredictable. I was afraid that once I started speaking, the grief would rise faster than my control, and the whole evening would dissolve into tears before I reached the truth. So I sat there with my coffee and went over it one more time. Stay calm. Say only what matters. Do not let either of them interrupt too early. Finish. When the cup was empty, I got dressed. I chose a black dress. Simple, elegant, sharp enough to make me feel steady. I put on a pair of small gold hoops I had bought for myself years earlier with the first big check I earned on my own. I liked that they were mine in the purest sense. No memories attached to anyone else. No gift, no story, no borrowed meaning. When I looked in the mirror, I recognized myself again. Tired, yes. Hurt, absolutely. But clear. By the time Donovan came downstairs, I was ready. He was wearing a charcoal suit and looked polished, attractive, successful. If a stranger had seen us leaving together, they would have seen a married couple going out for a special dinner. Nothing more. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you," I replied. "You look nice too." That was all. We drove into Midtown just before sunset. The city lights were starting to come on, and Atlanta had that evening glow I've always loved, glass and steel turning warm for a few minutes before night takes over. I sat in the passenger seat with my handbag on my lap and watched the skyline pass by, thinking how strange it was that buildings still felt more trustworthy to me than the man beside me. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. Top floor, wide terrace, white tablecloths, low lighting. Enough distance between the tables to make conversation feel private. It was elegant without being loud, expensive without trying too hard. Perfect. A host led us to our table near the terrace edge, where the skyline stretched behind us in clean lines of light. I set my handbag on the empty chair beside me and took my seat. 10 minutes later, my mother and Zoe arrived together. My mother came through the terrace doors first in a deep burgundy dress, smiling before she even reached the table. She looked proud, happy, excited by the occasion in the simple way she always was when her family was gathered somewhere beautiful. Zoe walked just behind her. She was wearing a dark green blouse, carefully chosen. Loose enough to hide what she could, fitted enough to still look dressed for the evening. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were not. My mother hugged me first. "I'm so excited," she whispered. I held her tightly and said nothing. Then Zoe stepped forward and hugged me too, briefly, carefully. For a second I felt the slight curve of her stomach, and the contact hit me so hard I had to look away when she stepped back. Donovan stood and greeted them both with practiced ease. A kiss on my mother's cheek. A quick, proper side hug for Zoe. Nothing anyone would question. But I was watching now. And once you know where the crack is, you can't stop seeing it. We sat down. Menus arrived. My mother admired the view. Donovan ordered champagne before anyone else really had the chance to weigh in, which I had expected. He liked making decisions in public spaces. It gave him a feeling of control. The bottle came. 4 glasses were poured. I watched Zoe lift hers and barely wet her lips. That tiny movement, more than anything else, made the whole situation feel real in a new way. She wasn't just my sister. She was my sister carrying a child. A child my husband had promised to claim after leaving me. For one brief moment, I felt something close to pity again. Then I remembered the note. I lifted my glass. "I want to make a toast," I said. 3 faces turned toward me. "To family," I said. "To the people who know us best. To a beautiful evening. And to the news I wanted to share with all of you together." We clinked glasses. My mother smiled brightly. Donovan smiled too, though there was a tension in his mouth now. Zoe touched her glass to mine without looking me in the eye. Appetizers came, then the main course. The conversation moved mostly through my mother, who was in a warm, talkative mood and filled the table with stories about home repairs, neighbors, contractors, and small frustrations turned funny by time. I let it happen. I let everyone settle. I let Donovan drink enough champagne to relax, but not enough to get reckless. I let Zoe sit inside her own dread. And then, after the plates had been cleared and the waiter stepped away, I folded my napkin and said, very calmly, "There's something I want to tell you." The table quieted immediately. My mother's hands came together in front of her chest, already hopeful. Donovan sat a little straighter. Zoe went still. I looked at each of them, one by one, and let the silence build just enough to hold all their expectation. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I said, "about what matters. About how easy it is to get busy and forget to really stop and see the people closest to you. So I wanted tonight to be special. I wanted all of us together." My mother reached for my hand. I let her take it. Then I smiled and said, "I'm pregnant." My mother gasped so loudly that the couple at the next table glanced over. Her eyes filled at once. She half rose from her chair, reached across the table, and grabbed both my hands in hers. "Kendra," she said, already crying. "Oh, my baby." For a second, seeing that joy on her face almost broke me, because if the evening had been different, if the people at that table had been the people I believed they were, this could have been a real moment, a beautiful one, but it wasn't. I looked past her and saw Donovan. He had gone pale, not surprised in a happy way, not emotional, pale with panic. His glass had stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes were fixed on me with the expression of a man trying to solve a problem too quickly and failing. Of course he was. He knew he hadn't touched me in months. He knew the math. He knew something was wrong. And then I looked at Zoe. The color had drained from her face too, but her reaction was different. Donovan looked afraid. Zoe looked devastated. She was staring at him, not at me, and the look in her eyes said exactly what I needed it to say. In that moment, she believed he had lied to her too. She believed he had been with both of us. She believed he had made promises to her while keeping another door open. I let that realization settle over the table. My mother, still overwhelmed, kept talking through tears. "How far along are you? Have you been to a doctor? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I squeezed her hands gently. "We'll talk about all of that," I said. "But first, I want to hear from everyone." Then I turned to Donovan. "You haven't said anything," I said lightly. "Are you shocked?" He looked at me as if he were searching for a signal hidden in my face. I gave him none. "I just wasn't expecting it," he said. His voice sounded dry, tight. "But you're happy?" I asked. He swallowed. "Of course." The lie was so thin I could almost hear it tearing. I turned to Zoe. "And you, Zoe? You're going to be an aunt." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the fear and confusion battling behind her eyes. "I'm happy for you," she said. Her voice cracked on the word happy. My mother either didn't notice or chose not to. The waiter returned and asked about dessert. My mother waved him off, too excited to think about food. Another bottle of champagne appeared. Coffee was ordered. The evening took on that slower rhythm dinners get after the main course, when people lean back and assume the important part is over. That was exactly what I wanted. Then I made my next move. "Before we leave," I said, "I want to do something." My mother laughed softly. "What now?" "Something simple," I said. "I want each of us to say what family means to us, what matters most, just honestly." It sounded harmless. Slightly sentimental, maybe, but harmless. My mother loved the idea immediately. "Oh, I'll go first," she said. Of course she did. She sat up, smoothed one hand over the tablecloth, and looked at each of us in turn. "Loyalty," she said. "That's what matters most. Families only survive if people are loyal to each other. If they show up, if they protect each other, if they tell the truth and keep their word." The words landed heavily in the center of the table. I saw Zoe blink fast. I saw Donovan lower his eyes. My mother smiled sadly, warmly, unaware of what she had just done to both of them. "That's my answer," she said. "Loyalty." I nodded. Then I looked at Zoe. "Your turn." She hesitated so long that the air around us changed. Her hands tightened in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "Forgiveness," she said. I held her gaze. "Forgiveness?" She nodded, still looking at me now. "Not anyone else." "Because people make mistakes," she said quietly. "And if a family is going to survive, there has to be forgiveness, even when it's hard." Hard. That word almost made me laugh. Instead, I simply said, "That's your answer?" "Yes." I watched her for another second, then turned to Donovan. "Your turn." He leaned back slightly, buying himself time. "Trust," he said at last. The irony of it was almost too perfect. "Trust?" I repeated. "Yes," he said. "If there's no trust, there's nothing." For a second I just looked at him, a man who had lied to me, lied to my mother, lied to my sister, stolen money from our accounts, rented another apartment, and built another future with my life still wrapped around his. Trust. I nodded slowly. Loyalty, I said, looking at my mother. Then I looked at Zoe. Forgiveness. Then at Donovan. Trust. I picked up my coffee cup, took one small sip, and set it down. "Those are beautiful answers," I said. Then I let my voice change. "Not much. Just enough. And I think tonight is the perfect night to find out what those words really mean." Everything at the table shifted. My mother's smile faded first. Donovan stopped moving entirely. Zoe looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. I placed one hand lightly over my handbag. "There's something else I need to say," I said, "and I need all of you to let me finish before anyone speaks." My mother frowned. "Kendra, what's going on?" "Please," I said. She went silent. Slowly, I opened my bag. I took out 3 folded copies of the note and placed one in front of each person at the table. One for my mother, one for Zoe, one for Donovan. None of them touched the paper right away. Before anyone could ask what it was, I said, "First, I need to correct something." I looked at my mother. "I'm not pregnant." She stared at me, confused. "What?" "I lied," I said. "And I'm sorry. I know that was cruel, and I know you didn't deserve it. But I needed all 3 of you here. I needed everyone listening." Her face changed slowly from confusion to concern. Then I looked at Donovan, then Zoe. "I'm not pregnant," I repeated. But someone at this table is. Zoe made a small, broken sound and covered her mouth with one hand. Donovan finally looked down at the paper in front of him. The person who is pregnant, I said, is Zoe. No one spoke. I could hear the low hum of the city, a burst of laughter from somewhere deeper in the restaurant, the faint clink of glasses from another table. Then I said the last part. And the father is my husband. My mother didn't react at first. It was as if the words reached her but could not settle inside her. She looked at me, then at Zoe, then at Donovan, as if one of us would explain it away before it became real. Read the note, I said softly. My mother picked it up first. Her hands were already shaking. She unfolded the paper and read. Across from her, Donovan didn't need to unfold his copy to know what it said. He had already gone gray. The hand resting on the table had tightened into a fist. Zoe was crying silently now, tears running down her face while she stared at the tablecloth. My mother lowered the paper very slowly. The look on her face is one I will never forget. It wasn't just grief. It was disbelief, humiliation, pain, and anger all arriving at once in a woman who had spent her whole life believing that the people at her table were safe. She turned to Zoe first. Tell me this isn't true. Zoe opened her mouth, but no words came out. That was answer enough. My mother turned to Donovan. He said my name instead. Kendra. No, I said. You can speak in a minute. Then I reached into my bag again and took out the manila envelope. I set it down in front of him. That's a divorce petition, I said. And a full record of the money you moved out of our accounts. This time, my mother looked at me sharply. What money? I kept my eyes on Donovan. Over the last 8 months, he transferred more than $47,000 from our joint savings into 2 hidden accounts under his name. He also used a joint credit card to pull cash and move it to himself. My mother looked from me to him, stunned. I continued. There are also payments to an apartment in Decatur, 2 bedrooms, monthly rent, utilities, everything documented. At that, Zoe let out a shaky breath and covered her face, so she hadn't known all of it. That didn't change anything, but I noticed it. Donovan finally spoke. Kendra, please, he said quietly. Can we not do this here? I looked at him. It was the first time all evening he had dropped the polished version of himself. No charm, no control, no performance left. No, I said. We're doing it here because you had every chance to tell me the truth in private, and you chose not to. He rubbed one hand over his face. I was going to tell you. I almost laughed. You wrote a note saying I would find out soon and that you were waiting until after your timing worked out. You rented an apartment. You moved money. That wasn't honesty. That was planning. My mother turned on him then. You stole from her? She asked. He looked at her, but he didn't answer. That silence answered for him. Then Zoe tried. Kendra, I'm sorry, she said through tears. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't. I held up a hand. Don't, I said. She stopped. For a second, all I could hear was my own pulse. I had imagined this moment so many times. I had imagined anger rising up and carrying me through it. But standing there in the truth, I didn't feel rage the way I thought I would. I felt tired. Tired in a deep, clean way, like a wound had finally been opened and drained. I looked at Zoe, my little sister, the child I had helped raise in all the small ways older sisters do, and I looked at Donovan, the man I had married, the man who had sat across from me for weeks, asking me about my day while building another future behind my back. Then I said the only thing that mattered. You both knew exactly what you were doing. No one argued with that. My mother was crying now too, but quietly, with her jaw set and her back straight. She still hadn't lost her composure. She never lost it completely. She just held pain more rigidly than most people. Donovan glanced around the terrace as if suddenly aware that we were in public after all. I leaned forward slightly. "You don't need to worry," I said. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to make sure there's no confusion." I tapped the envelope. "My lawyer has everything. Every transfer, every account, every payment. You will be served officially, and the joint assets will be protected." He stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "You talked to a lawyer?" he asked, almost blankly. "Yes." "How long have you known?" "Long enough." That answer seemed to land harder than anything else, because it forced him to understand what the last few weeks had really been. Every dinner, every car ride, every Sunday lunch, every smile. He sat back in his chair and looked at me as if he no longer recognized me. Maybe he didn't. That was fine. I stood up. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. My mother looked up at me at once, her eyes full and glassy. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said. Her hand closed hard around my wrist. For a second she held on, and in that grip I felt everything she couldn't say fast enough. Grief, apology, fury, love. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. Then she let go. I picked up my bag. Donovan pushed his chair back slightly. "Kendra, wait." I didn't. Zoe was crying openly now, trying and failing to speak through it. I looked at her one last time. There was so much I could have said. About betrayal, about trust, about what she had done to me, to herself, to our mother. But in the end, I didn't want any final speech. I didn't want to hand them more of my pain. So I said only this: "You will have to live with what you chose. I won't do that part for you." Then I turned and walked away. I crossed the terrace without rushing. My heels struck the floor in slow, even beats. I could feel people noticing that something had happened, but no one said a word. That was one reason I had chosen that place. Public spaces have their own discipline. People behave differently when they know strangers are watching. At the terrace doors, I heard my mother's voice behind me, sharp, controlled, strong. "Donovan, sit down. We are not finished." I kept walking. The elevator lobby was quiet and softly lit. I pressed the button and watched my reflection in the dark glass while I waited. A woman in a black dress, gold earrings, straight shoulders, a face I recognized. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, the noise from the terrace disappeared. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without effort. The doorman opened the front door for me when I reached the lobby. I stepped out into the Atlanta night and stood on the sidewalk for a second, letting the air hit my face. The city was alive around me. Traffic. Music from somewhere down the block. The glow of headlights moving through intersections. Everything outside that restaurant was still moving. That helped. I did not go home. Instead, I drove straight to Camille's apartment in West Midtown. Camille had been my closest friend since college. She was one of the few people in my life I trusted without effort. I hadn't told her everything before that night because once I said it aloud to someone who knew me, it would become even more real than it already was. But when she opened the door in pajamas with sleep in her eyes and saw my face, I didn't need a long explanation. "I left him," I said. And then, finally, I cried. I cried in a way I had been holding back for weeks. Not neatly, not quietly, not with dignity. Camille pulled me inside, sat me down on her couch, handed me tissues, and let me fall apart. That night I told her everything. The attic, the note, the affair, the hidden money, the apartment, the dinner, all of it. She listened without interrupting, except once to hand me water and once to say, very softly, "I'm so sorry." When I was done, it was well past midnight. Camille sat back, looked at me for a long moment, and said, "You are not going back there tonight." "No." "Good. Then you're staying here." I did. I slept in her guest room, though I barely slept at all. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes, a raw throat, and one overwhelming feeling sitting underneath everything else. Relief. Not happiness, not peace, but relief. The truth was out. I didn't have to act anymore. The next few days were full of calls. Diane, paperwork, logistics, what to gather, what not to say, where to stay, what would happen next. Donovan called several times. I didn't answer. He texted too. "Please talk to me. It's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you." That last one almost made me throw my phone across the room. I gave everything to Diane and let her answer where answering was necessary. By Monday, the legal process had started moving. By Wednesday, I had collected what I needed from the house while Donovan was away, and with Diane's guidance. By the end of the week, I had signed a lease on a temporary apartment. My old life had not ended all at once. It was being dismantled piece by piece, and I let it happen. Because there are times when saving yourself looks a lot like demolition, I stayed with Camille for 2 weeks. During the day, I went to work and did my best to function like a person whose life had not just been split in half. At night, I came back to her apartment, sat on her couch with takeout containers and legal documents, and let myself feel whatever showed up. Some nights it was anger. Some nights it was sadness. Some nights it was nothing at all, which felt almost worse. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Not because Donovan suddenly became decent, but because he had no leverage. Diane had too much documentation. Lena's financial report was thorough, clear, and impossible to explain away. Hidden accounts, transfers, cash advances, the apartment, the timeline. Once all of that was on paper, there was very little left for him to argue. He settled. He signed. I kept the house in the division, recovered my share of the money, and separated every financial tie that still connected me to him. It took about 3 months from the night of the dinner to the final signature. When Diane called to tell me it was done, I was sitting in my car outside my office. "It's finished," she said. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest. "Thank you," I told her. She paused, then said, "You handled this well." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, not crying, not smiling, just breathing. Finished is a strange word. It sounds clean. Most endings aren't. But it was finished in the only way that mattered legally, and that was enough for then. Donovan kept trying to reach me for a while. At first, it was calls and texts, then emails, then long messages that mixed apology, self-pity, and excuses in almost equal parts. He said he had been confused. He said things got out of control. He said he had never meant for any of it to happen the way it did. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had already said the only thing that mattered. He knew what he did. He did not need more words from me. As for his job, I heard later through mutual acquaintances that things did not go well for him after the divorce filing, and financial disclosures started circulating in the right professional places. I never chased the details. I didn't want to build a second life out of watching his fall. That chapter had already taken enough from me. Zoe tried to reach me too. Unlike Donovan, she did not send polished explanations. She sent long, uneven, painful messages that sounded exactly like what they were, a person trying to say something too late. Then the letters started. Actual handwritten letters. Camille brought the first one in from the mailbox and looked at me before handing it over. "It's from your sister," she said gently. I knew before I opened it. Zoe had always been better on paper than in person, more honest, less protected. In the first letter, she told me how it had started. One bad decision after a family gathering, then another, then a secret that got harder to stop because they had already crossed the line once and did not know how to go backward. She wrote that she had tried to end it. She wrote that Donovan kept telling her he was going to leave me. She wrote that she had convinced herself the truth would hurt less if it came later, which is the kind of lie people tell themselves when they are already too deep inside something shameful. I read that first letter sitting on the floor of my temporary apartment with my back against the couch. Then I read the second. Then the third. I read every one she sent. And I will say this because it's true. They affected me. Not enough to erase what she had done. Not enough to make me forgive her. But enough to remind me that she was still my sister, still the person whose hair I used to braid before school, still someone whose voice lived in the oldest rooms of my memory. That made everything harder, not easier. If she had been cruel and cold from beginning to end, I think I would have found anger simpler to carry. But remorse complicates anger. Love complicates betrayal. History complicates everything. I did not write back. Not then. I wasn't ready, and I refused to fake readiness just to make other people more comfortable. My relationship with my mother changed too, though not in the way I feared it would. For the first few weeks after the dinner, she called me every morning, always early, always with the same first question. How are you this morning? Not how are you doing? Not are you okay? How are you this morning? As if she understood that when someone is hurt deeply enough, asking about the whole future is too much. Morning is enough. Morning can be answered. Some mornings I said, fine. Some mornings I said, not great. Some mornings I cried before I could answer at all. She never rushed me. About a month after the dinner, she asked me to come by the house for coffee. Just the two of us. I went on a Saturday morning. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Red brick, white shutters, magnolia trees, fresh paint on the porch railing. It unsettled me how little betrayal changes the appearance of a place. My mother had coffee ready when I walked in. She also had lemon cookies on a plate between the mugs, which in our family usually meant she had something important to say. We sat at the kitchen table. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me and said, I feel like I failed you. I answered immediately. You didn't. She shook her head. I should have seen something. Zoe was living in my house. He was in my house. You were in my house. And I saw nothing. Mom. No, she said softly. Let me say this. So I did. I kept choosing the easier explanation, she said. I told myself Zoe was restless. I told myself Donovan was attentive. I told myself everything was normal because I wanted it to be normal. I reached across the table and took her hand. That does not make this your fault. Her eyes filled. It still feels like failure. I squeezed her fingers. You raised me to survive this. You raised me to think clearly. You raised me not to beg for what should have been given freely. That is not failure, she cried then. So did I. We sat in the kitchen where so much of my life had happened and let ourselves be sad together. Eventually, we talked about Zoe. Not in circles, not in vague terms, directly. She is still my daughter, my mother said quietly. I know. I cannot stop loving her. I would never ask you to. She looked at me for a long moment. But what she did to you is something I will never excuse. That mattered more than I can explain. Not because I needed her to choose between us, but because I needed her to name the truth clearly. No softening, no pretending, no pressure to move on before I was ready. After that conversation, things between us grew steadier. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. We started seeing each other outside the old Sunday pattern. Coffee during the week, quick lunches, short visits. We built a new rhythm, one that belonged to the two of us and did not require pretending a broken thing was whole. As for me, I threw myself into work. Part of that was survival. Part of it was relief. Work made sense. Measurements made sense. Drawings made sense. A building either stands or it doesn't. A wall is load-bearing or it isn't. You can inspect damage. You can test strength. You can rebuild with better materials. People are harder. A few months after the divorce was finalized, my firm promoted me to senior associate. The managing partner called me into her office late one afternoon and offered me the role along with lead responsibility on a mixed-use development in Old Fourth Ward. It was the kind of project I had wanted for years, large enough to matter, visible enough to leave a mark on the city, complex enough to demand everything I knew. I accepted on the spot. When I walked back to my desk, I stood for a moment looking at the drawings spread out in front of me and felt something I had not felt in a long time: pride. Not because I had survived the worst thing that had happened to me, not because I had exposed two people who betrayed me, just pride in my own work, my own mind, my own life. That feeling mattered. By then I had moved into a new apartment in Old Fourth Ward, 1 bedroom. Tall windows, hardwood floors, clean lines, morning light across the living room wall. It was not large, but it was mine in the truest sense. I chose every piece of furniture myself. I chose the lamps, the rug, the dishes, the art. There is a quiet comfort in building a home where nothing carries the weight of a lie. Sometimes, late in the evening, I would sit by the window and look at the skyline and think about how much of healing is not dramatic at all. It is not speeches. It is not revenge. It is not one perfect breakthrough. It is repetition. Sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. Buying groceries for one. Laughing at something without guilt. Working an entire afternoon without seeing the past interrupt the present. Answering your phone without bracing yourself. That is what recovery looked like for me. Small things done over and over until they start to feel like a life. I still thought about Zoe. Less often than before, but still. I wondered if she was all right. I wondered whether she had finally stopped waiting for Donovan to become the version of himself he had promised her. I wondered if she was ashamed every time she walked into our mother's house, or if time had already started smoothing the edges for her in ways it had not yet done for me. I did not know, and for a while, I chose not to know. Forgiveness was not something I could force just because it would make the family easier to explain to other people. If it ever came, it had to be real. It had to be built slowly, if it could be built at all. About 6 months after the night on the rooftop, I was sitting at my drafting table on a quiet Saturday morning, working on preliminary sketches for the Old Fourth Ward project. Sunlight came through the windows at an angle that made everything in the room look clean and sharp. My coffee had gone half cold beside me. The city stretched out beyond the glass, familiar and restless and alive. I was drawing the first lines of a building that did not yet exist, and suddenly I realized something simple. I was still doing what I had always done. I was building, not restoring, not trying to recover the exact life I had before, not trying to rebuild the same structure on damaged ground. I was building forward. That realization settled into me quietly, without drama. Forward. A new home, a new routine, a new version of family, a new understanding of myself. By then, I was 32. I had lost a marriage. I had lost certainty. I had lost the version of my sister I thought I knew. But I had not lost myself. If anything, I knew myself better than I ever had before. I knew what I would tolerate. I knew what I would walk away from. I knew that being calm is not the same as being weak. I knew that protecting yourself is not cruelty. And I knew that truth, spoken clearly and at the right moment, can end one life and begin another. So that is my story. Not a story about revenge, because revenge was never really the point. Not a story about winning, because there are some losses no one wins. It is a story about finding out that the people I trusted most had betrayed me, and deciding that their betrayal would not decide who I became. It is a story about patience, about preparation, about telling the truth without begging to be believed, about leaving with my dignity still intact. My name is Kendra. I live in Atlanta, in an apartment with tall windows and a view of a skyline I help shape. Every morning, I get up, make coffee, look out at the city, and remember that strong things are not built by accident. Then I get to work.